So the last few Wednesday nights, we've talked about suffering Christians. And then we took a Sunday night 2 weeks ago and talked about suffering Christians. And so I want to come back to that tonight and help you, because it's helped me, and it still helps me. So there's going to be a few verses to look at, but if you want to take your Bible, 1 Peter, and there'll be several verses out of there in different chapters, but you can look at, if you want to start out there with me in 1 Peter, go ahead and turn there. Turn to chapter 4, and we'll go in between chapter 4 and chapter 1 in 1 Peter. So while you're turning there, I want to read a verse and kind of give the backdrop for tonight. I went ahead and have you turn to 1 Peter because that's going to be the main portion of where we will be the rest of the time. But I want to share the first part of this and give you another verse to go with. But used to think, my thinking has changed a lot. The older I got, the more I realized things. But a lot of times people would paint a picture of being a Christian that you never have any problems, nothing ever goes wrong. We preach about the good things so much that we, a lot of times, and God is good, don't get me wrong. And if it wasn't for Him being with us through what I'm about to talk about, we wouldn't have any hope. But anyway, let me slow myself down. We deal with things not only just because we're Christian, but because we're human. And the human life itself was plunged into sin. And sin has consequences. Now, everybody that's born into the world, for by one man sin entered into the world, death by sin, so death passed upon all men, for they all have sinned. So we have become a fallen race or a fallen creation because of the nature of sin. 3 years ago, I think it was, 2017, we took a youth trip and we took the kids to Kentucky. And we saw the Ark, which if you've never seen that, that's a pretty amazing thing to go see. And the same people that run the Ark, they also have a creation museum just a little north of there. And so we did both. We went and saw the creation museum. And it was fantastic. I encourage people, if they ever have an opportunity to do that. But one of the things in the Creation Museum, it's a huge complex, and they have different displays, lifelike displays set up. But they had, in one room we went through, it's probably about the size of this sanctuary, it was a picture or a recreation of the Garden of Eden, how it would be before sin. And they had Adam and Eve, and everything was just so beautiful. And it had scriptures posted on it. It's a self-guided type of tour you go through, and you read all the scriptures. And it talked about the wonderful Garden of Eden and all this, that, and the other. And you can see how beautiful everything was. And then you go around the corner, and then there's a verse about how. And in that scene, by the way, there was a serpent up in the tree, And then you go around the corner, and in a little hallway, it's got the verse that talks about sin entering into the world and it had the scriptures about man being cursed because of the sin. And so when you go around the corner to the next room, is the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve after sin. And it shows the destruction or the damage done by sin. I know before you went around the corner, and this is just a depiction, by the way, but they were two Adam was a very young and strapping, kind of not a bodybuilder, but a muscular type of just a strapping guy, and Eve was a beautiful woman. And then you go around the corner, and now their dark hair has turned gray, and they've got wrinkles, and they're having to work the fields and that kind of thing. And it's called the curse of sin and how it destroys the body. And so what we have to understand is just by nature of being a sinner, we're going to suffer some. Our bodies are going to suffer. We deteriorate. We don't get any better. I can remember Miss Janet years ago. I think it was 2015. I started getting shots in my knees. I had arthritis. I was hurting and different things. I went to the doctor and they did X-rays and they said, "Man, you got arthritis in your knees." They started giving me injections in my knees, and I've been doing that. I had surgery 18 years ago, I think it was. I had torn a patellar tendon, had to have all that rebuilt. And then back in end of March, April, I think it was, I went to the doctor. I was having pain in my hip, and X-rayed that, and I had 3 different things going on, and he said, really, you need a hip replacement, but he said, you're too young. He said, you'd have to have 3 more in your lifetime. And he said, the risk of infection and so forth. But you know what? Our bodies are going to deteriorate. Now, listen to me. I know I could stand to lose a few pounds, and that probably would help my knees and it would help my hip. But there are people who invest in their body. I mean, I'm talking about and there's nothing wrong, by the way, with exercising and taking care and watching what you eat. But there are people that can do that to the T and drop dead of a heart attack. Now, I'm not advocating just live how you want to and do whatever you want to do. I'm not saying that, but I mean, we can if our focus is in the wrong place, I mean, you can put all that attention into that, and still you're going to go when it's your time to go, right? So, I mean, just give me a biscuit and a bowl of gravy, and God called me home. We're going to go, right? If I get an amen out of you right there, brother. But now my point is, sufferings. Are you really suffering when you're eating biscuits and gravy? No, you're not really suffering. Sufferings are a part of normal living. Now, number one, let me say this. We all have to deal with some type of suffering. Whether it's physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually, we all suffer. Every child of God, let me speak to Christians, every child of God shares something common, and that is that we are a creation of God, but yet we are still in the flesh, and that flesh has to suffer. Now, here's a verse. I'll tell you to go ahead and turn to Peter, but let me read this verse before we get there. In Philippians chapter 1, in verse number 29, it says, "For unto you it is given in the behalf of Christ, not only to believe on Him, but to also suffer for His sake." Let me say this. Christians also experience suffering simply because they're Christians. Now, if you're not suffering much for being a Christian, I wonder how good of a Christian you are. Not what kind of Christian you are inside of here, but what kind of Christian you are out there. When you put yourself on the line in front of everybody to be a Christian and to claim Christ and to claim, the Word of God and to claim to walk the straight and narrow, do that out in the public. And see how many friends you have. See how many people want to be close to you. See how many people want you at their table. Why? Because He said that you're going to suffer for His sake. For unto you it is given in the behalf of Christ, not only to believe on Him, but also to suffer for His sake. Now, Jesus had already told His disciples that they were going to have to suffer. We were talking right before we came in the door about people that would wear clothing or a face mask or whatever, headgear that has the president's name or the slogan of the president or whatever, and they're being literally assaulted for wearing whatever clothing or headpiece or whatever, face mask that has Trump on it or whatever, and they get assaulted for that, beat up. Now think about that. When you identify with something, you put yourself out there. And right now, it's almost a dangerous thing to identify with President Trump. Now, isn't that shame? I read articles all the time. Kids get sent home from school because they had a Trump shirt on. Now, isn't that crazy? But that's the world we're living in. I'm telling you, all that hatred, all of that anger that's manifested in that direction is going to shift. I've already seen it shifting. Why do you think in the very, very liberal states, they try to keep churches shut down and they try to do everything they can to keep people from gathering to work? All of that's going to be placed upon Christians here soon, by the way. Because let's just say, even if President Trump wins another term, one of these days his term is going to come to an end. And every bit of anger and frustration or whatever that's been building and building and building and building, one of these days it's going to be fully unleashed. It's unleashed right now, but kind of there's a damper on it. But it's going to be fully unleashed one day. And to identify as a Christian, I'm telling you, that's where they're coming for next. They're going to come after Christians. And so the Lord said, you're going to have to deal with it. That's a normal part of being a Christian. Let me give you just some things tonight. Talking about sufferings are a normal part of living as a Christian. Let's go into Peter. Okay, you're in 1 Peter. Look at chapter 1 and verse number 6. It says, "Wherein ye greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations." Okay? I want you to notice that these sufferings, these trials that we go through, normally they're both intermittent and short. They're intermittent, meaning, it's just a period of time. Because notice how he mentions here that though now for a season, if need be, you're in heaviness. Okay? Thank the Lord. Man, we have to go through trials sometimes. I heard a preacher say one time that somebody asked him what was his favorite verse in the Bible, and he said he had several. All the ones that started with, "and it came to pass." Because he said he knows that whatever I go through, it didn't come to stay. It came to pass. And so you think about that. We might have to go through some things, but thank goodness it's just for a season. Let me give you just a backdrop on another verse. Psalm 30, verse number 5, it says, "For his anger endureth but a moment, in his favor. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning." Think about that. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy cometh in the morning. I'm going to tell you, if you live long enough, you're going to have some dark nights, some heavy nights, some sorrowful nights. But thank goodness, the sun comes up in the morning. And he said, "Joy cometh in the morning." I had years ago, I went through a tough time in ministry, and I had a preacher. Let me say this: when I talk to young people, I tell them this. I give them a verse that says, "In the multitude of counselors there is safety." Proverbs tells us that, by the way. But your counselors don't need to be people on your same level. In other words, teenagers don't need to be counseling teenagers and giving advice to teenagers. They need to go somebody older, wiser. And there was an old preacher told me one time. He said, I was telling him, I had some issues going on with ministry and, just dealing with some stuff. And he said, "Go to bed. Go to sleep." He said, "The best thing you do is just go to bed and go to sleep. Wake up to a new day." He said, "The Lord's mercies are renewed every day. Whatever you think you can't get through today, go to bed, go to sleep. You start off with brand new mercy and grace in the morning." I thought, you know what? It's pretty good advice. Pretty good advice. My son, we went and toured Arkansas Tech, and he's going to be moving. And, of course, he's never been away from home. And he'll be leaving, it's looking like the second weekend in January. I'm not 100% sure of that. But we went around town. I've never been through. I've only driven through Russellville as far as by the interstate. But we went, toured the campus on the outside. There were some places we couldn't go on the inside because they had to shut some things down. But anyway, we got to see everything. And there's campus ministries there. By the way, there's a MBSF, Missionary Baptist Student Fellowship. There's a Methodist presence, I believe. There's a Presbyterian. But here's what if I could give advice on this too, because now I think about things I never really thought about before. We're fixing to have a son that's fixing to be moving out and going to a college. I told him, I said, number one, yes, get involved with the student ministries for multiple reasons. Number one, they're going to have some type of worship service there on the college campus. And I said, number two, they usually have these outreach, and they'll feed you. You can go get a good meal, But I told them this. I said, but that cannot replace the local church. You've got to have a local church body. Going to the student, and listen, I'm for student ministry. We support one, by the way. We support at Monticello. There's a student ministry there out of Pauline Church. We support that. But the student ministry doesn't replace. I said, you need to be around old people. Don't that make y'all feel good? I said, you need to be around the older people. I said, you don't need to be around just people on your level. You need some wisdom of the older people. I said, plus, if you've got problems or issues, you need to have a church family that you can go to that's there to help you. Help that you can't get from a collective college student body. Just there for getting a free meal. But anyway, what am I talking about? I've got some timers, Anyway, we're talking about joy cometh in the morning. Okay, whatever problems you're going through, sleep through it, get through it. There's a new day of grace coming. The sun's going to come up. Now, let me say this. Trials are normally both intermittent and short. Just a season. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Now notice the wording here the Apostle Paul used, our light affliction, which is but for a moment. Now, it's hard when you feel like you're going through things over and over and over and over and over and over. I like that song, the old hymn, Keep Me Safe Till the Storm Passes By. You know, I don't like stormy nights. My wife can't stand stormy nights. I mean, she won't sleep. Weather gets rough and all that. But, thank goodness that storm finally passes by. It might be rough for a little while, but that storm passes by. That light affliction, it's but for a moment. Let me say trials are normally both intermittent and short. But let me say this also. Trials can become extremely severe. Trials can become extremely severe. Now, 1 Peter, you're there, chapter 4. Look at me, chapter 4 with me. Look at verse 12. Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. I want you to think about, I mentioned Job last week, how he lost all that he had in just a matter of short period of time. Very extreme. That fiery trial. He said, don't think it's strange that you got to go through this. Because I was bad about thinking just because I was a Christian and then add on top of that, I surrendered to preach, man, that somehow or another I had this big shield of protection all around me. That I got these angels all out in front of me and they can't nothing touch me, man. I'm the man of God. Well, I learned real quick that's not true. It's not true at all. Nothing exempts us. We have nothing about us that exempts us from going through trials. And the more I read of Scripture, the more I see it is expected to happen. We are supposed to live a life expecting to go through things. And if you expect it, it can help you ground yourself stronger in the faith so that when it does come, you'll be prepared for it. It's kind of like getting insurance. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with going ahead and having barrel insurance. That preacher, it's kind of morbid, kind of thing. No, it's not. It's not. I mean, having insurance on your health insurance. Of course, you're supposed to have vehicle insurance, right? I'm talking about just planning ahead of things so that when the time comes, that you're prepared. All those kind of things. It's nothing wrong because we all have to go through trials. And he said, don't think it's strange when you go through these things. Let me give you another one. Trials come in a mirage of different ways. In 1 Peter chapter 1, it's interesting that 1 Peter talks a lot about trials. But he says this, wherein, in verse 6, chapter 1, verse 6, wherein you rejoice greatly, or you greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, you are in heaviness through manifold temptations. Now notice this, he talks about manifold temptations or a variance of different things. Okay? We're talking about physical issues, financial issues, spiritual issues, emotional issues, family problems, persecutions, personal things. Boy, the list goes on and on and on. All those different areas can affect you. Listen, if you're trying to scratch your head figuring out how you're going to pay your light bill or how you're going to put groceries on the table, and of course, I mean, as we get older, maybe we get settled in some of those things. But there's you go from a financial issue to physical problems, and somebody that goes through physical. I was talking about my aunt who passed away, and there's other people that battle cancer and the chemo treatments, and they battle and battle and battle and battle. And they're sick all the time. They finally get to a point and say, I don't want to fight it no more. You get to a point where you've got quality of life versus quantity of life. If I live longer but can't do nothing but go to the doctor, what kind of life is that? And so there's a whole bunch of trials come in many different ways. And then let's look at one more tonight. Trials, and this is all of that being said that brings us to this situation. Trials and tribulations are purposeful. Purposeful, meaning there's a reason. There's a purpose. Notice in chapter 6, he says, wherein you rejoice greatly. Or greatly rejoice. When you read it backwards, it's kicking in. What's that called? When you write backwards or read backwards? Dyslexic. Yes, my dyslexia. Y'all didn't know I was dyslexic, did you? I keep it pretty good. I can count from 100 to 1 backwards. I can say my alphabet backwards. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm just kidding. I had somebody send me a picture earlier. I was watching it on, had a picture, and I had a big 70-inch TV, and they had watching the YouTube. By the way, if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, Brother Joel does a great job. I mean, he's got a camera back there, but that's not just it. I mean, he edits it and produces that video. The scriptures are in there. If you haven't checked it out, go to YouTube, check out Calvary NBC Hamburg. And he records and uploads these, and it's been a blessing to many people. We've had people to send emails from different parts of the country saying they're watching the program. But anyway, they sent me a picture. They said, "Hey, we're watching this on TV." And I text back. I said, "I've never been fond of TV preachers." Y'all can laugh. I said, I've never been fond of TV preachers. They was watching on a 70-inch TV, watching it on YouTube. I've never been fond of TV preachers, but trials and tribulations are purposeful. He says, wherein you greatly rejoice. Why are you rejoicing? Because you're fixing to go through something, or even right now you're going through something. And to understand the purpose of that, that's when we went back last week to Romans 8:28, to know that all things work together for good to them who love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. Now, to think of wherever you are in life right now, when I think about God's plan for my life, like from point A to point B, I think of just a straight line from here to there. But that's not how God does it. From A to B, there's a lot of, y'all know what I'm saying? A lot of ups and downs, a lot of twists and turns. But to be, I would dare say, probably Brother Joel's the youngest one in here tonight. Or no, Tyler back there. I'm sorry, Tyler. He stuck his head out. I didn't see you, Tyler. Tyler's definitely the youngest one in here tonight. But everybody, and no doubt, Tyler, you probably already had your share of ups and downs already in life. But I'm 45, I think. If you're older than 45, for sure. But if you're Brother Heath, he's what, 30 something, 38. So he's knocking on 40 right now. I tell you this, we all, wherever we are right now in our life, in all phases. Spiritually, financially, physically, emotionally, I guarantee you this, we all have had some ups and downs and some twists and turns to be where we are right now in our life. Okay? When we took prayer requests a while ago, you know what I heard? I heard ups and downs, twists and turns, people having to deal with things with their family, going through. It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. Now, valleys, you go through, that's the low part, and then you get up on the mountain for a little while. And then God says, okay, you got to start traveling again. You know what? We might have to go back down in that valley. That's the low part of life. And you might have to deal with some issues. And you might have to stay there a little bit. And then God said, okay, it's time to move again. And you know what? You go back up in that mountaintop. And I love being on the mountaintop. But sadly, can't stay on the mountaintop. So when I'm down in that valley, I start reading about Jesus being the lily of the valley. The rose of Sharon, the bright and morning star. You know what I learned? That He's with me in that valley. Oh, it feels great on that mountaintop, man. Everything's going well. The job's going well. The family's doing well. I'm physically doing good. Everything's well. Then God said, okay, it's time to go. Trials and tribulations are purposeful. While you're in that valley, that's that low point of life, learn a lesson from there. Because here's what happens. When we come out on top, there might be somebody else in a valley or about to go in the valley, and something that you and I have already been through. We go through things so that we can in turn try to be a witness and a help and encouragement to somebody else. And I want to tell you, there's been times where I've had people, and they say, "Preacher, I know what you're going through." And I say, "No, you don't." They say, "Oh, yes, I have. Let me tell you something." I say, you know what? There were times where I felt bad, but after I listened to somebody else, I didn't feel so bad anymore. Every time I read what we read last week about the Apostle Paul, he said, you get upset over minor things. He said, let me tell you my issues. Let me tell you what I've been through for the cause of Christ. Shipwrecked 3 times, beaten, imprisoned. I mean, all the things he listed, I started thinking about, man, Somebody says something wrong to me and I get all upset and I want to wither like a flower. Somebody slams the door in my face and they don't want to hear about Jesus. And man, I start withering like a flower. I hadn't been shipwrecked 3 times. I hadn't been beat. I hadn't been publicly stripped and humiliated for the cause of Christ. When I start thinking about it, I really got it good. Valleys, trials, sufferings, they're part of our life, but we must keep going forward for the cause of Christ. I really thank you all for coming out tonight. I hope this Bible study has been a blessing to you. And I pray that you'll take what you've learned and maybe pass it on to somebody else.